Here we have this old dusty engine that I'm going to take out, take apart, and rebuild. I'm not sure how successful I'm going to be in rebuilding this engine, but all we have to worry about today is taking this engine out, which that in itself is quite the job. But first, let's rewind to the beginning. That was my future self. Now we are back at square one. So it does look like a lot of things to remove, but it appears less than the GT350, so I'm a little bit less nervous. And this is my second time at this. Not my second time at trying to remove this engine, but my second time as in my first time removing an engine was from the Shelby GT350. So this is my second time around, first time with the Camry. I did look at the instructions and it does seem simple enough. For those of you that think that I'm a genius, I am. Thanks to this, I have a step-by-step guide of a literal removal of engine, and I just have to follow it. I'm just pretty resourceful. So the first few steps are pretty easy. You just have to disconnect and remove the battery, then we have to drain the radiator fluid, and we have to remove this hood. I will need help removing this because this is about 50 or 60 pounds, and I can't do it by myself. Unfortunately, the only thing I don't have this time around is my 2-post lift, so that will make things just a little bit annoying and add more time. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna jack this car up on all fours and then we can continue. Wiggle, off. Wiggle a little harder, off. And then we just have to untangle this chicken wire. And it's off. Now we can move on to the next step, which is draining the radiator. So there's a knob that I can see from the top, but I really can't get to it from the bottom because there's a cover. So I need to remove that first and then we can drain it. I suspect this Camry hasn't used the bathroom in quite some years, so let's relieve it. Yep, it's still going. So while this is still relieving itself, the next step is to remove the hood, which I'm gonna do with another pair of hands. I meant extra pair of hands. It's not like I'm Shiva. Actually, it's not too bad. I can lift it for like 2 seconds maybe. Fun fact, the windshield wiper nozzles never worked because this was broken and I didn't do this. So the next step was something that I honestly did not know what the hell they were talking about. I couldn't even find it here. So maybe as I'm working on this, I'll find it later. So we're gonna move on to the other step, which is removing the radiator. So it's pretty much removing like any connections, any hoses, any brackets to remove the entire radiator. I am curious to see how much effort it's going to take to remove this hose. I think it's gonna be easy, but I guess we'll find out. As I was removing this, I thought, wow, this is coming off so easy. The rest of the car should be a piece of cake. But little did I know, things were gonna get difficult real quick. So the radiator's off. That was pretty simple. It was also pretty light, which I was glad. But now it's like draining a whole bunch of weird fluid everywhere. So now moving on to the next step, which is removing the throttle and accelerator lines. That's pretty simple. Then we can remove the brackets and take those out of here. Then we can move on to removing the cruise control and other things. I feel a bit lost working on this car because I don't recognize a lot of the things if I compare it to the GT350. The technology has just changed a lot. And there's nothing complicated about removing these cables and hoses. It's rather annoying and I feel like they might break easily. I think we're probably like about a quarter of the way through, so that's optimistic. The next step is basically to remove this air hose. It's pretty simple, just remove the bolts and take it off. All right, I take it back. Instead of the radiator, this air box was the easiest to remove. It's just a clamp, a few bolts, and then it's off. Okay, so there were a few steps there for a manual car. I am glad right now that I don't have a manual. At least that this car is not a manual because I can skip those steps. There are a few other things there, like a few other weird hoses that honestly, I don't know what they're talking about. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove everything that is connected to the firewall and then move on from there. I do have to remove the AC condenser, and in none of those steps does it say that I need to remove the belt. I find it pretty funny, like, I need to remove this. I was like looking, I'm like, okay, well, I need to remove this regardless. It doesn't have a tensioner. So I looked online and I'm like, how do you remove this belt? So pretty much this bolt is the tensioner in this car. You just have to loosen it and then the alternator will just start going down little by little and then you can slide the belt off. I thought that was pretty cool. Honestly, I'm not looking forward to this. Every single time, look at me, every single time, like if I'm a mechanic working on different cars, I'm just comparing this to my 350. I do not have fun memories with the AC condenser. It was like in the way, a pain to get to, and oops. And this is gonna probably be the same. Okay, so now that those 3 bolts are loose, I don't have all day to be doing that manually, so time to use the cordless ratchet. Now comes the funnest part of all this. And by the funnest part, I mean the opposite, the least fun, which is removing all of these cables and hoses that are connected to the engine that will prevent it from coming off. That is very annoying because, at least in this area right here, there is a cluster of just cables and hoses, and it just drives me crazy. And another thing is that sometimes you miss them, sometimes it's just hard to get to. So that's a whole story within itself. I found one of, like, I don't know, step 2 or 3, I had to remove the igniter. I had no idea where it was. Remember, one of those like, I'll get back to it, I'll find it when I did. So just looking at everything I have to remove, I found that it's right here. Of course, very small. I look at this and I'm like, I'm not really sure where I need to remove it because it doesn't look like it's in the way to have the engine come off. But you know, these Toyota techs that made that probably know better than me. This was quite a mission because these 3 connectors right here, they were so hard to get to. You could barely get to them and everything was just really stuck on there. I think, again, it just comes back to age. And I mean, if this hasn't been disconnected in I don't know how many years, then I have to deal with that right now. But good thing it's off, so now we can move forward. What I thought was going to be like a 4-hour job ended up being longer, and who knows how much longer. I didn't think I was gonna be here that long because I'm thinking this is an old car, it's a smaller engine, it's gonna be way easier and faster. Nope, that is out the door. I think it's mainly because it's old, so a lot of things are like really stuck on there and it just makes it a pain. I pretty much have everything disconnected for the exception of one hose. It's a heater hose. It's right here. I honestly can't get to it, so I'm just thinking I'm gonna leave it like that for now. And then when I'm pulling the engine, then I can get more, hopefully have more access to then remove that hose. But now we need to move to my least favorite part, which is now underneath the car. Time to just do this the old school way with jacks. So I pretty much have to remove the cross member. I have to remove the drive shafts. Let's see how that goes because let's just see. And the exhaust from the engine and a few other suspension parts. Suspension work. I have a love-hate feeling towards it. I love the results, but I hate the process. The moment of truth, let's see if this impact works to remove this nut for the drive shaft. If not, I do have a bigger impact, but I'm hoping that this is enough. That worked. So the instructions called to remove the tie rod. So I looked online and someone showed how to remove it. You basically had to, I had already removed this nut, but they said just put it back on just a little bit and then use a hammer to just hammer it off. I did that. I guess once I was hammering it off, that nut shifted into some other thread, so now it's on there stuck in diagonal. So I'm laughing, but internally I'm crying. So I'm just going to use my famous, we'll have a smaller reciprocating saw this time, and then just cut this off. If it isn't obvious, it's another day of trying to get this engine out of the Camry. So everything in the engine bay went as smooth as it could possibly go, at least so far. But when it came to the suspension work, of course, it's not going as smooth. The main issue now is removing these drive shafts from the transmission, and that's due to the car just being low on the ground and not having that much leverage. So the new plan is trying to remove the drive shaft from here. So pretty much removing that cover, exposing the drive shaft, and then using this new big pry bar that I just purchased today to try and pry it off that way. I'm really hoping that this works because if not, I honestly do not see any other way. This part right here made me hate this more than suspension work. Front wheel drive shafts. Come on. New plan. This is staying on because it's just being a pain and it's not coming off. So I think it'll be fine for the engine to come off. There's enough clearance if I remove this canister here, and that should be fine. I'll worry about removing it once it's off. All I did is just remove it's like a metal zip tie, and remove the boot just so it can give enough clearance. It's time to move on to remove this cross member, which is pretty much this long bar here in the center. So there's 6 bolts in total. There's 2 on each side and then 2 in the middle. I can tell you that working with a car on the ground is not enjoyable. I definitely do not envy those of you that have to unfortunately do this on the floor. All this reminded me of is that I need to get that 2 post installed ASAP. On to the last few things underneath the car. We need to disconnect the exhaust from the engine. It has 3 bolts. They are a bit rusted, but I applied PV blasters, so hopefully they are easy to take off. And then the last thing under there is to remove the engine bracket. Once we are done there, then we can move on to the engine bay, which let me tell you, I cannot wait because being under there is not fun. These exhaust to catalytic bolts really suck. One of them stripped and it took like about an hour to remove, and the rest came off with studs intact. This engine brace is really easy, but extremely heavy. And then it turns out that it got stuck on another wire, so I had to struggle even more to remove it. Fun times. I just drained the oil from the Camry. I did not show it here on video because you guys have seen me drain oil already too many times, so it's played out. But now I'm so excited because we are finally getting to lifting this engine. So now there's just a few things left to do. We have to remove the bolts from the motor mounts, and now I have my engine lift here because we are so close. So I can connect it here to the engine and then start raising it little by little. There is that one hose that's still attached to there, but just other than that, I don't think there's anything else. Hopefully not, but that's why I'm just going to raise it little by little just to see that everything is fine and nothing is still attached, and then hopefully it's a big win. Okay, I have to be honest, at this point, I'm extremely tired of just disconnecting 1,000 hoses and wires. And on top of that, now there's like a million bolts for the engine mounts. And every single time that I'm removing them, I'm panicking because I'm thinking that the engine is going to shift or move. And it turns out it ended up shifting. But of course, it is secured, but in my mind, I'm thinking it's going to fall all the way to the bottom. When I was removing those last 2 bolts, I told Chris, those have to be the last 2 bolts and then that engine is gonna drop. He's like, no, they're not. Surely I was right, man. But there is one last bolt, so I guess, you know, whatever, I wasn't right. It's a pass-through bolt for the motor mount, but after that, we can start raising this. Okay, so I see home base and I'm rushing, but at the same time, I can't be sloppy just in case there's anything else that's attached to the engine. And let me tell you that the way that I'm removing this engine is way worse than if I were to just have a 2-post lift and drop the engine while I'm raising the car. And I have to tell you that I had my doubts because I didn't know if this engine lift would raise the engine high enough to clear the car, but I'm so glad that it did. This feels like a victory. The engine is out. It definitely needs 2 people because it starts kind of leaning towards the driver's side. Even in the pictures, it shows it. So you kind of need to be balancing it and rotating it just so a lot of things don't get stuck there. But I am going to set this engine down and then I'm going to leave. This has been way too long. So in the next video, we will undress it, we'll remove the transmission and just clear up everything so it's just the engine, and then we can start taking it apart. Even though I may not seem as excited as I am internally, I'm just so tired.